Is liberty dying where you live? Escape to Keene at freekeene.com.
Okay, so we're here today in support of House Bill 618, which would reduce the penalty for possessing 1/2 ounce or less of marijuana to a violation. Simply put, now that every other New England state has decriminalized marijuana possession, and now that it's clear that these reforms have not created problems in other states, we believe it's absolutely time for New Hampshire to end its archaic practice of arresting and prosecuting grant staters whose only offense is possessing small amounts of marijuana. Support for decriminalizing marijuana possession has plainly increased in recent years, and as of last spring's WMUR Granite State poll, only 24% of New Hampshire residents remained opposed to decriminalization. And yet the idea of simply reducing marijuana penalties does have some vigorous opponents remaining in the Granite State. Foremost among them has been the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police. However, as you'll see from the handout, which I have not yet given you, but please get one, the Chiefs Association simply does not speak for everybody in law enforcement. And in fact, they don't even speak for all of the police chiefs. Some members of the New Hampshire law enforcement community have spoken out in favor of decriminalization, and we know that many others are silent supporters. Additionally, we've seen in other states that law enforcement objections to decriminalization have faded quickly after these laws have been implemented. In Vermont, the police chief who led the fight against decriminalization in 2013 was Virginia's police chief George Merkel. Today, less than 2 years after Vermont's decriminalization law was signed, Chief Merkel admits that the law has not turned out to be a problem. There's a quote from Chief Merkel on this handout, along with several other quotes from people in law enforcement, including those here in New Hampshire. We'll hear more about the law enforcement perspective soon from our special guest, but first it is my honor and pleasure to introduce the prime sponsor of HB 618, Representative Adam Schrader.
Well, thank you. There are many reasons I am proud to serve as the prime sponsor of House Bill 618, but I think the best argument for this bill is one that comes straight out of our New Hampshire Constitution. Part 1, Article 18 says, all penalties ought to be proportioned to the nature of the offense. In other words, the punishment ought to fit the crime. Currently, the penalty for possessing 1/2 ounce or less of marijuana is a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in jail or a fine up to $2,000. All 5 other New England states have determined that harsh criminal penalties are not appropriate for simple possession of marijuana. I strongly believe we in New Hampshire should move forward with decriminalization so that the limited resources available to our criminal justice system can be directed toward things that Granite Staters are truly concerned about: violent crime, property crime, and other serious threats to public safety. If my colleagues and I were to ask the people who voted us into office what they think about marijuana policy, the answer would be clear. They support not only decriminalization, but outright legalization. The most recent Granite State poll conducted by the University of New Hampshire Survey Center found 59% support for legalization, with only 35% opposed. But this bill does not legalize marijuana, and it's very important that we all understand that. House Bill 618 simply reduces the penalty for possession of 1/2 ounce or less of marijuana, or 5 grams or less of hashish, to a violation punishable by a fine of $100 for a first offense, $200 for a second offense, and $500 for third and subsequent offenses. It also reduces maximum penalties for other marijuana offenses. It's true, as Matt said, that some members of the law enforcement community are opposed to House Bill 618. But we know that many police officers do support the bill. For example, John Tomasi is a retired police sergeant from Salem and a former member of the New Hampshire Drug Task Force. He can't be here this morning, but he is submitting written testimony. I am, however, very pleased to be able to introduce our guest. He's a retired narcotics officer and law enforcement veteran of 34 years, having served in both the Maryland State Police and Baltimore City Police, and he currently serves as executive director of a group called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Major Neil Franklin.
It's my pleasure to be here this morning in the wonderful state of New Hampshire to talk about this very important issue. let me first explain to everyone what our organization of law enforcement against prohibition is. For those of you that do not know, we are an international organization of law enforcement professionals. As police officers, judges, criminal prosecutors, federal agents, DEA, FBI, and so on, anyone in the criminal justice system who deals with the arrest of people, judiciary, and corrections, and including parole and probation. Globally, we have about 160,000 total supporters. Thousands of those are in law enforcement, the positions that I just explained to you. We are an accredited NGO organization by the United Nations. So we present regularly in front of our representatives in the United Nations. And we have a very, very long and impressive list of police chiefs, judges, and others, police officers who are members of our organization and speak out on this issue of sensible drug policy reform. We have been in the trenches, we have been on the front lines of the war on drugs, and we are now speaking and advocating for changes to the policies that we have, mainly the policies of prohibition, which we know do not work. As it relates to marijuana decriminalization in this country, there are many states in this country that have had marijuana decriminalization since the 70s. And I believe Maine is one of those states. And from a law enforcement perspective, we believe that it is a waste of limited and valuable resources. Financial resources, man-hour resources, and so on. Let me give you an example of the man-hours that are being wasted here in the state of New Hampshire. Just about every year in the state of New Hampshire, law enforcement is making over 2,500 marijuana possession arrests. That's possession arrests. We're not talking about distribution or cultivation or anything else, just simple possession, no other crimes involved. That equates to about 8,300 man-hours every year. About 1,038 8-hour work days. Straight salary, you're looking at about $200,000. And that's not talking about overtime, that's not including benefits, that's not including court costs and what happens in our courts. It is a big waste of limited resources that we have. We have violent crime that, yes, across the nation is declining, but we can do a much better job if we were to take those 8,000 plus hours of man-hours for policing and put those towards crimes of violence, domestic violence, crimes against our children, and so on. I understand the position of many of my law enforcement counterparts. It's an emotional one. I personally have been doing this work for a very long time. I worked undercover when I started with the Maryland State Police in the late 70s and the early 1980s. Working my way up through the ranks in the Maryland State Police, at one time I was commanding 9 drug task forces at one time. That's 9 individual counties as a major for the Maryland State Police. I get the emotional position here. But when I started having conversations about the data, about the numbers, about the amount of people that we were arresting, and what happens from a simple arrest when it comes to the future of those people that we arrest for simple drug possession, marijuana possession. The punishment does not fit the crime. There are some who still believe that marijuana is a gateway to using other harder drugs. One of our speakers says this to me. He says a drug arrest record for marijuana resulting in little chance for meaningful private sector or government job. That is the gateway to a lifetime of lower social economic status. The arrest for a marijuana possession charge will follow you for the rest of your life. The financial cost there is staggering for a person, not just for a person, but for their family and their future. Again, it doesn't fit the crime. The punishment does not fit the crime. Children are a concern of mine. I believe they are a concern of everyone here. But as we look across the country at states that have already decriminalized marijuana, most people would think that those rates of use for those young people will go up because we're sending the wrong message. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you that that's not the truth. The rates of use are stagnant. As a matter of fact, in those states where we've had marijuana decriminalization for quite some time, like Maine, the rates of use for our young people are lower than here in New Hampshire. So, let me wrap this up. At the end of the day, it is my strong recommendation for support of HB 618. It's going to do a lot for law enforcement. It's going to do a lot for the limited resources. It's going to do a lot regarding the focus towards violent crime. We can bring those numbers down even further, paying attention to the crimes that need to be paid attention to. And again, from a law enforcement perspective, I get where my counterparts are coming from as they oppose this piece of legislation. It is emotional. It is something that we in law enforcement have been doing for decade after decade after decade. And you know what, folks? It's hard to make a change when it comes to that. It was very difficult. It was very hard for me after devoting decades of my life to drug enforcement. It was hard for me to accept the reality that it was not the direction we should have been going in as law enforcement. Thank you very much.
For the final speaker, we've had a number of defense attorneys that have been advocating for this bill all along, and to kind of speak for all of them, I guess, is Mark Siskey.
Good morning. I'll be brief. We look forward to testifying this morning, and one of the reasons that we look forward to testifying this morning is because we would like to bring to this conversation the reality of what's going on out there, not only with the youth of the state of New Hampshire and the poor of the state of New Hampshire, but the entire criminal justice system with regard to this issue. It is about time that we became honest with ourselves, honest with the system, and honest with the facts that this is not the scourge that has been brought upon us with myth and with magic. It's now known that not only is it medically a true cure for many ills, but financially, as I just flew back from Denver, is a boon to communities throughout the United States. It's time to ignore the myth, and it's time to ignore all of the scare tactics and get down to business. It's time for the Senate, it's time for the legislature, it's time for the governor to catch up with the people of the state of New Hampshire. When over 70% of the people in the state of New Hampshire are in agreement that people shouldn't go to jail for the possession of a small amount of marijuana, it's a wake-up call for all of us. And what's truly, truly shameful, is that we inflict scars on the citizens of this state that impact them in ways that we can't even imagine. And those scars that are placed upon our own citizens sometimes are there because they can't afford attorneys to defend them in court. And we'll get into that particular problem before the Senate today, and just how unfair that is, and just how much that impacts the people of the state of New Hampshire. We are coming before you today, and before the Senate today, in a strange position. We're speaking out against our own financial interests, our own economic gains. We make a lot of money representing people charged with the possession of marijuana. We don't want to do that anymore. It's a dishonest position, and it's an immoral position, and that's where we're coming from. We no longer want to benefit from this cruel and this unusual law that penalizes the citizens of the state. So a few of us have showed up today to let that be known. We don't want to pad our wallets any further with the money of the citizens of the state of New Hampshire just because of a law that is unreasonable and is based in myth. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And now we'll be happy to take questions.
Matt, you've been here before. I mean, we've passed the House
A few times.
a few times, and we've come up against the wall in the Senate. It's going to be different this time.
I don't know, Gary. No, the conversations that we've had with senators so far this year have been very positive. I believe the Senate is far more open to this than it has been in previous years. No guarantees, but we're going to get a fair hearing this year. Thank you.
If it does end up passing the Senate, Governor Hassan had said in regard to a previous version of this bill that she would likely veto it. How optimistic are you that you're going to make it past her desk with this?
How optimistic am I? Well, I'm confident that, I'm tempted to quote Rocky IV, one of my favorite movies. You know, if Chief Merkel in Vermont can change, and if some of the people with law enforcement against prohibition that have spent decades fighting the drug war can change, everybody can change. I really believe that. In 5 years, we'll look back and wonder how in the heck it took us so long to reduce these penalties. And my only hope is that Governor Hassan will keep an open mind and will allow the Senate to pass what it thinks is a good bill, and that she'll consider it.
I have a question for Representative Schroeder, if you're willing to answer a question. You said that the punishment should fit the crime, but yet you have an increasing penalty with subsequent offenses. There are other things that are violations, such as speeding tickets and parking tickets, that the punishment does not increase upon subsequent violations. Why does the penalty in HB 16 increase with subsequent violations?
Well, the bill as originally written didn't include the graduated increases, but the House Committee on Criminal Justice and Public Safety did a lot of work on the bill as well when we brought it before them, and I very much thank them for the time that they put in with that. And they came out feeling like the graduated offenses and fines would serve as possibly as a deterrent, and made the bill stronger moving forward to the Senate and before the governor.
Anybody else? Thank you all for coming. We'll be over in State House Room 100, and I do have handouts for press and anybody. You got one.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.